All right, so today we're going to do something a little bit different for this deep dive.
Oh.
Yeah, we're going way back in time, back to 1968.
Wow, back to the
Yeah,
Stone Age of audio, huh?
I know, right? But you know what's so funny? Back then, they were actually already dealing with some of the same audio problems that we still wrestle with today, you know?
Like what?
Well, for one thing, they were obsessed with this thing called Dolby B noise reduction. Have you heard of that?
Dolby B, yeah, vaguely.
You know, you think about it, back then, cassettes, they were notorious for this, like, really annoying hiss.
Oh, yeah, that like shh sound.
Exactly. Not exactly what you want when you're trying to, chill out to your favorite tunes, right?
Right.
But Dolby B was like their secret weapon.
Oh, how did that work again?
It was pretty clever, actually. It basically compressed the quiet parts of the music when you were recording it.
Okay.
And then when you played it back, it expanded them again. So
Yeah.
the hiss was like hidden,
That's pretty...
Yeah. And it's like the ancestor of all those noise reduction algorithms we have today, even in our, super high-tech digital world.
So even back then, they were already thinking about ways to make the listening experience better.
Exactly. I mean, perfect sound has always been the holy grail, right?
Absolutely.
And it's wild to think that they were already on that quest back in the 60s.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? We may not have to worry about tape hiss anymore, but we've got our own digital demons to fight,
Totally. Like, what are we even on now? Like, compression artifacts and lossy formats, it never ends.
It's the never-ending battle for fidelity.
Exactly. But you know what else they were dealing with back then that just seems crazy to us now? Wow and flutter.
Wow, and flutter.
Yeah. It was this problem where if the tape speed wasn't like perfectly consistent, you'd get this weird warbling effect.
Oh, like the music was kind of seasick?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And can you believe their solution? Servo-controlled tape drives. Like, can you imagine?
That's pretty advanced for 1968.
I know, right?
All right.
And here we are in 2025, where digital playback means like perfect timing down to the, nanosecond.
Makes you appreciate how far we've come.
It really does.
Yeah.
In a way, it's like they were fighting these fundamental battles so that we could have, sonic bliss decades later.
They were the pioneers.
Totally. Speaking of pioneers, this article also talks about this new tape formulation that was like the next big thing back then, chromium dioxide.
Chromium dioxide?
Yeah. Or crobalin, as they called it.
Okay.
And it was supposed to be like a game changer for cassette sound quality. Better high frequencies, less noise.
Huh. So they were already experimenting with different materials to try to improve the sound?
It's like they knew cassettes had potential. They just had to figure out how to unlock it.
And from what I've read, chromium dioxide tape really was a big step forward. It paved the way for even better tapes later on, like the metal tapes that everyone loved.
It's like a whole evolutionary chain of tape technology. But, even with all this cool stuff happening, the article is pretty honest about the limitations of cassettes.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, they talk about things like frequency response, especially at the high end and distortion levels.
Yeah, I can imagine that was a challenge back then.
Totally. Remember, this was way before digital audio, so physics was like their biggest enemy.
Right, you're limited by the physical format itself, the width of the tape, the speed of the tape.
And the laws of physics.
Exactly. No matter how much you tweak things, you can only get so much out of that tiny little cassette.
It's like trying to fit an entire orchestra into a shoebox.
A very, very small shoebox. And it's interesting because in a way, we're still dealing with those same kinds of trade-offs today, even with our, futuristic audio technology.
How so?
Well, think about it. We have access to incredible lossless audio files, but those things can eat up storage space like crazy.
Yeah, tell me about it. My neural implant is practically overflowing with music.
Exactly. So even now, it's all about finding that balance between fidelity and practicality.
So true. And it makes you realize that the quest for perfect sound is, kind of a never-ending journey.
It's a journey we're all on together.
And it all started way back in 1968 with those pioneers who were trying to squeeze every last drop of quality out of those little plastic rectangles.
Those humble little cassettes.
It's a pretty amazing story when you think about it.
It really is.
And to think we're just getting started.
It's funny, when you really dig into this article, you can almost feel their frustration with these limitations.
Oh, yeah.
Like they're so excited about the potential of cassettes, but these technical hurdles keep popping up.
It's like they're trying to convince themselves as much as anyone else.
Totally. And one of the biggest things that comes up again and again is the physical limitations of the cassette itself.
Right. Like, how much can you really do with such a tiny little tape?
Exactly. I mean, they talk about the narrow tape width and the slow tape speed. It's like trying to cram a whole symphony orchestra into a closet.
It's crazy to think that they were recording at like, what, 178 inches per second?
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, we're here in 2025 streaming lossless audio at the speed of light. And these guys were dealing with tape speeds that would make a snail look fast.
Talk about a different world, right?
And it's not just the speed. The article also mentions this thing called underbiasing, which I guess was a way to boost the high frequencies, but it also introduced more distortion.
Oh yeah, underbiasing, that was like a balancing act.
That's like they were constantly trying to squeeze every last bit of fidelity out of those tapes, knowing they were up against the laws of physics.
And you know what? It's kind of similar to what we still face today, in a way.
Really?
I mean, yeah, think about it. Even with all our fancy tech, we're still making trade-offs between things like fidelity and file size.
True. Like, I love my lossless audio, but those files are huge.
Exactly. So in a way, we're still wrestling with those same fundamental questions of how to get the best possible sound within certain limitations.
Wow, that's a good point. And it makes you realize that the pursuit of perfect sound is like an ongoing journey.
It really is. It's like we're always striving for something better.
But getting back to the article, there's another thing they talk about that caught my eye, this thing called the zero recording level.
Oh yeah, the zero level.
What was that all about?
Well, basically, that was the level where the sound started to distort on cassette tapes.
Oh, I see.
And from what I've read, it was much higher on cassettes than on open reel decks.
So basically, there wasn't much wiggle room before things started to sound crunchy.
Exactly. And that really highlights one of the key differences between the two formats.
How so?
Well, with open reel, you could be more conservative with your recording levels, but with cassettes, it was all about pushing the limits.
So like recording as hot as you could without going over the zero level.
Yeah, exactly. Because they were so focused on maximizing the signal-to-noise ratio, you know, squeezing as much good sound out of those tapes as possible.
I guess it makes sense given all the limitations we've been talking about.
And you know what? That approach actually gave cassettes their own unique sound.
Like that warm analog vibe that people still love.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny how something that was once considered a limitation has now become a sought-after characteristic.
It's like how a slightly blurry photo can sometimes be more interesting than a perfectly sharp one.
It's those imperfections that give it character. Right?
Totally. But speaking of imperfections, the article also mentions this thing called modulation noise. Have you ever heard of that?
Modulation noise. Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
What is it exactly?
Well, basically, it's this kind of inherent fuzziness that you get with magnetic recording, you know, because those tiny particles on the tape don't always line up perfectly with the recording head.
So it's like a subtle distortion that affects the clarity of the sound.
Exactly. And it was one of those things that even Dolby couldn't completely eliminate.
Oh, wow. So even with all their fancy noise reduction tech, they couldn't get rid of it entirely.
It's like a reminder that no technology is perfect, you know?
Yeah, there's always some kind of trade-off.
But getting back to the article, it's interesting how much they also talk about the physical fragility of the tapes.
Oh, yeah. They were pretty delicate, weren't they?
I mean, compared to those big, sturdy, open reel tapes, cassettes were like little butterflies.
I can only imagine what those high-speed rewind and fast-forward functions did to those poor tapes.
They probably got stretched and mangled all the time.
Yeah, those were the days, right? I'm so glad we don't have to deal with that anymore.
Yeah, our digital music libraries are definitely more robust.
But even with all these challenges, the article still ends on a hopeful note.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they basically say that cassette technology was rapidly improving and had the potential to become a major force in the hi-fi world.
And you know what? They were right. Cassettes may not have reached audiophile nirvana, but they definitely brought music to the masses in a way that nothing else had before.
They made it personal, portable, accessible.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It really is. It just goes to show that innovation is all about pushing the boundaries, even when you're facing seemingly impossible obstacles.
And never underestimating the power of a tiny little plastic rectangle. All right, so we've talked about hiss and wow and flutter and all those fun things. But there's one more technical gremlin that this article really dives into, crosstalk.
Crosstalk, yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah, not so fun if you're an audiophile trying to enjoy some nice stereo separation.
No kidding, it's like the ultimate buzzkill, right? Hearing sound bleed from one channel to the other.
Totally, and it's interesting how the article tries to downplay the issue by comparing cassette crosstalk to open reel crosstalk.
It's like they're saying, hey, it could be worse.
Exactly. But you can almost sense a little bit of defensiveness there, like they're trying to convince themselves as much as their readers.
Like deep down, they knew it was a problem.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if they wanted cassettes to be taken seriously as a hi-fi format, they had to address this crosstalk thing head on.
But you know what's so funny is that even today in 2025, with all our advanced technology, channel separation is still a big deal for us audiophiles.
Oh, absolutely. We're still obsessed with that perfect isolation, each instrument having its own distinct space in the soundstage.
It's like that feeling of being surrounded by the music, right?
Exactly. When you have really good channel separations, like you can pinpoint the exact location of every instrument, it just adds this whole other dimension to the listening experience.
It's like the difference between watching a movie on your phone and watching it on a giant IMAX screen.
Perfect analogy. Suddenly the world just opens up and you're completely immersed in the experience.
It's like you're right there in the recording studio with the musicians.
And that's what it's all about, right? Capturing that magic, recreating that sense of presence.
Absolutely. And it's amazing to think that something as seemingly simple as channel separation can have such a huge impact on how we experience music.
It really does make a difference, and it's a testament to how much those early audio pioneers cared about every little detail.
They were true craftsmen.
They really were. And speaking of craftsmanship, for all the talk about technical limitations, this article also has this really nice moment where they reflect on the broader potential of cassettes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they talk about how this format, even with all its flaws, had the power to bring high-quality music to a wider audience.
And they were right.
They absolutely were. Cassettes may not have been perfect, but they democratized music in a way that nothing else had before.
Totally. Suddenly, everyone could have their own personal soundtrack.
Exactly. It was like the Walkman revolution just waiting to happen.
And it's crazy to think that those little plastic rectangles played such a huge role in shaping our relationship with music.
They made it personal portable. You could take your music with you wherever you went.
It was a game changer.
And you know what? Even today, that idea of having your own personal curated soundtrack is still so important.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have access to pretty much every song ever recorded, but we still spend hours creating playlists, crafting these sonic narratives that reflect our own individual tastes.
It's like we're all DJs of our own lives.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It really is, and it all started with those early cassette pioneers who dared to dream of a world where music could be portable, personal, and always within reach.
So the next time you're listening to your favorite playlist beamed directly into your brain through your neural implant,
right.
Take a moment to appreciate those pioneers who paved the way.
The ones who fought the hiss and the wow and the flutter and the crosstalk.
The ones who believed in the power of a tiny little plastic rectangle to change the world.
They were the true heroes of the audio revolution.
Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of cassette tapes. Circa 1968, we've journeyed back in time, explored the triumphs and the struggles, and hopefully gained a new appreciation for this amazing technology that helped shape the way we listen to music today.
So until next time, keep those ears open and keep exploring the fascinating world of sound.
Happy listening.